The alien princess thought humans were weak, until a brave soldier risked everything to save her. Princess Nira stood at the observation deck of the Astrarian palace, her iridescent scales reflecting the light of 3 moons. The human delegation would arrive soon, and she couldn't suppress her skepticism. The Astrarian Empire had ruled this sector of space for millennia, their biological superiority evident in their enhanced strength, natural armor, and advanced cognitive abilities. Yet here they were, entertaining diplomatic relations with humans, a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel. Captain James Warner led his small team through the crystalline corridors of the palace, acutely aware of the guards' dismissive glances. After 15 years in the interstellar court, he'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. Humans might lack the natural advantages of other species, but they had something else: adaptability, determination, and an uncanny ability to survive against all odds. The throne room doors opened to reveal a sight that made even the seasoned captain pause. Princess Nira sat upon a throne of living crystal, her form both elegant and intimidating. Her scales shifted colors like an aurora, and her eyes held the wisdom of centuries. "Welcome, Earth delegation," she spoke, her translator converting her harmonic language to standard English. "Though I question the necessity of this meeting." James stepped forward, maintaining diplomatic protocol despite her obvious disdain. "Your Highness, we appreciate the opportunity to discuss potential collaboration between our peoples." Nira's scales rippled with amusement. "Collaboration? Your species is barely out of its cradle. What could you possibly offer the Astrarian Empire?" Before James could respond, alarms blared through the palace. The crystalline walls pulsed with red warning lights. A guard burst into the throne room, his scales dark with urgency. "Your Highness, Nomad raiders have breached our outer defenses. They've somehow bypassed our shield matrix." Nira rose, her royal composure unchanged. "Deploy the royal guard. These raiders will learn the price off." An explosion rocked the palace, sending fragments of crystal raining down. James reacted instinctively, diving forward to shield the princess as a section of the ceiling collapsed. His reinforced uniform took the impact, but he felt ribs crack under the pressure. Nira stared at him in shock, not just because he'd moved to protect her, but because he'd done so without hesitation despite his obvious physical limitations. "You're injured," she stated, surprise evident in her harmonic voice. James managed a smile despite the pain. "Part of the job, Your Highness. But right now, we need to move. Those weren't random raiders. Their timing's too perfect. This is an assassination attempt." Nira's scales shifted to a deeper hue as she processed his words. The human was right. This attack was too well coordinated to be coincidental. More surprisingly, he was still functioning despite injuries that would have incapacitated many species. "There's a secure chamber below the palace," she said, rising gracefully. "But reaching it will require passing through exposed areas." James checked his tactical display. "My team can provide cover, unless you prefer to trust your safety to someone less fragile." For the first time, Nira saw something in his eyes that challenged her preconceptions, not just determination, but a quiet confidence that came from facing impossible odds and surviving anyway. "Lead the way, Captain," she replied, her tone carrying less condescension than before. As they moved through the chaos of the attacked palace, Nira began to wonder if perhaps she had misjudged not just this human, but their entire species. The day's events were far from over, and her understanding of human nature was about to be dramatically revised. Plasma fire lit up the crystalline corridors as James and Nira moved through the palace's lower levels. His broken ribs screamed with each movement, but he kept pace with the princess, his tactical scanner searching for hostile signatures. "Your palace security seems to have been compromised at every level," James observed, checking around a corner. "This isn't just a raid. It's an inside job." Nira's scales flickered with anger. "Impossible. The Astrarian Royal Guard's loyalty is absolute." An explosion rocked the corridor ahead, and James pulled Nira into an alcove, their bodies pressed close in the confined space. The proximity allowed her to feel his elevated heart rate, the warmth of his skin, so different from her own people's biology. "Your Highness," he whispered, "in my experience, absolute loyalty only exists in theory. Someone close to you has betrayed you." She started to object, but another blast cut her off. Through the smoke, armed figures emerged, wearing Royal Guard armor. "There," one shouted. "Take them both." James moved with surprising speed, drawing his sidearm and firing in one fluid motion. Two attackers fell before they could raise their weapons. "Still think I'm wrong about the inside job." Nera's scales dulled with shock as she recognized the fallen guards. "Commander Rexar. He's served the throne for decades." "Time to move," James urged, grabbing her arm. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through her body. His skin was so soft compared to Astrarian scales, yet there was strength in his grip. They ran through maintenance tunnels, the sounds of combat echoing through the palace above. James's breathing grew labored, his injuries taking their toll, but he never slowed. Nera found herself studying him with increasing fascination. How could something so physically vulnerable display such endurance? "The secure chamber is ahead," she said, indicating a heavily reinforced door. "But the biometric scanner?" James nodded. "Will only recognize Astrarian biosignatures. I'll guard the entrance while you—" "No," she cut him off. "You've proven yourself, Captain. I'm adding your signature to the security protocols." He looked at her in surprise. "That's quite a gesture of trust, Your Highness. Perhaps it's time I reconsidered what makes a species truly strong." The secure chamber was a marvel of Astrarian engineering, its walls lined with living crystal that responded to Nera's presence. James sat heavily on a bench, finally allowing himself to show the pain he'd been hiding. "You need medical attention," Nera observed, approaching him with unexpected concern. "I'll live," he managed to smile, "though I probably don't cut a very impressive figure right now." On the contrary, she knelt beside him, her scales shifting to gentle blues and purples. "You've demonstrated a kind of strength I never considered valuable before. My people pride themselves on their natural advantages, but you simply refuse to give up, regardless of your limitations." James met her gaze. "That's humanity in a nutshell, Your Highness. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most naturally gifted species, but we're really good at surviving." She reached out, her scaled fingers brushing his cheek with surprising gentleness. "Call me Nera. I think we're past formalities." The moment was interrupted by the chamber's communication system activating. Reports flooded in. The palace was under full assault, and more Royal Guard members had turned traitor. The legitimate forces were in disarray. "They're trying to overthrow the monarchy," Nera realized, her scales darkening with anger. "Generations of tradition, stability. Sometimes traditions need to change," James said carefully. "Maybe this is an opportunity, not just a crisis." She turned to him sharply. "What do you mean? Your people are strong, advanced, capable, but you're also rigid. You've relied on natural superiority for so long that you've stopped evolving as a society. Maybe that's what this rebellion is really about." Nera was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. "You're suggesting I consider their grievances, even after this attack?" "I'm suggesting you demonstrate a different kind of strength, one that comes from adaptation, not just dominance." She studied him. This human who had shattered every preconception she held about his species. His body might be fragile compared to her people, but his mind, his spirit. "Will you help me?" she asked softly. "Your perspective. I find it increasingly valuable." James stood, wincing but determined. "Whatever you need. Though I warn you, dealing with humans tends to complicate things." "Perhaps," she smiled, her scales shifting to warm, inviting colors. "That's exactly what the Astrarian Empire needs." The secure chamber sensors indicated the fighting had reached the palace's central levels. They would need to act soon to prevent further bloodshed. But in this moment of quiet understanding, both the human captain and the alien princess realized that their alliance had become something more than mere necessity. The real challenge would be convincing their respective peoples that cooperation between their species wasn't just possible, it was essential. The secure chamber's holographic displays showed chaos spreading through the palace. James studied the tactical readouts while Nera accessed the royal command systems, her scales shifting with concentration. "There," James pointed to a pattern in the troop movements. "The rebels aren't just fighting, they're herding loyal forces away from the central archives." Nera's eyes widened. "The ancestral records, they contain more than just history. They hold access codes to our planetary defense network. Which means this isn't just about overthrowing you," James concluded. "They're planning something bigger." Their eyes met, and Nera felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. The human's presence had become complicated for her. His soft skin and apparent fragility had initially seemed repulsive, but now she found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his adaptability, his way of seeing beyond traditional perspectives. "We need to reach the archives," she said. "But the routes will be heavily guarded." James checked his weapon. "Then we make our own route. Your palace has maintenance tunnels, environmental systems. The crystal harmonics network," Nera breathed. "It connects every part of the palace. But using it, it would require complete synchronization between us. Physical contact. Our biosignatures would need to align." James raised an eyebrow. "That sounds intimate." "It is," she admitted, her scales flushing with iridescent patterns. "No Astrarian has ever attempted it with a non-scaled species. The sensation could be intense." He stepped closer, and she felt that radiating warmth that seemed unique to humans. "I trust you," he said simply. She placed her scaled hands on his temples, and he did the same to her. The moment their skin made contact, the crystal walls around them began to hum. Nera gasped as their consciousness merged with the palace's living crystal network. James's mind was unlike anything she'd experienced. Turbulent, passionate, filled with swirling emotions and iron determination. His thoughts wrapped around hers like warm silk, and she found herself responding in ways she never imagined possible with a human. Together, they moved through the crystal matrix, their merged consciousness navigating paths invisible to normal senses. When they emerged in the archives, both were breathing heavily, their bodies tingling from the sheer connection. "That was," James started. "Yes," Nera agreed, her scales still shimmering from the experience. But there was no time to process what had happened between them. The archive doors burst open, and Commander Rixar entered with a squad of rebel guards. "How disappointing," he sneered. "Our princess, corrupted by human weakness." Nera stood proud. "I've learned that what you call weakness is actually a different kind of strength." The battle that followed would be remembered in Astrarian history as the moment everything changed. James and Nera fought as one, their earlier mental connection translating into perfect physical coordination. His tactical brilliance complemented her natural abilities, making them far more effective together than either would have been alone. When it was over, Commander Rixar lay defeated, and his surviving forces surrendered. The recovered data proved he had been working with off-world interests to destabilize the entire sector, using the Astrarian defense network to start an interstellar war. In the aftermath, Nera stood before her people, her scales radiating with newfound purpose. James stood beside her, still bandaged but unbowed. "The Astrarian Empire has endured for millennia because of our strength," she addressed the crowd. "But today, I learned that true strength comes in many forms. Change is not weakness. Adaptation is not surrender. And those we once considered beneath us may have the most to teach us." She reached for James's hand, ignoring the gasps from the traditional elements of her court. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and sure. "Our future lies not in isolation, but in cooperation. Not in rigid tradition, but in flexible growth." And perhaps, she smiled at James, her scales shifting to colors of love and promise, in unexpected connections. Later, in the privacy of her chambers, Nera traced the scars on James's healing body. "My court is scandalized," she murmured. "A princess and a human. Having second thoughts?" he asked, running his fingers along her scales in a way that made her shiver. "No," she pressed closer to him, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I'm having thoughts about the future, about change, about showing both our peoples that strength comes in many forms. Including love," he suggested. Her scales rippled with joy. "Especially love." The Astrarian Empire would never be the same. The changes that followed, political reforms, increased cooperation with Earth, the gradual acceptance of interspecies relationships, all traced back to that pivotal day when a princess learned that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. And if anyone questioned the sight of their princess with her human consort, they needed only look at how their civilization had flourished since accepting that different kinds of strength could exist together, complement each other, and create something greater than the sum of its parts. In the end, it wasn't about who was naturally stronger or more advanced. It was about finding strength in unity, in diversity, and in love.